welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here, we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Joanna, welcome to the podcast. I've been wanting to have you on for months, and so I'm so excited that we were able to make this work. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, well, let's just get right into it. The first question that I like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, what is something you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do?
Ooh, I think that a lot of people don't know that I'm quite introverted. I have a social media presence and I've spoken at lots of different conferences and events and things like that. But I'm happiest when I'm by myself or with my cat or with my equally introverted husband, just enjoying quiet and simple things. I find it very difficult to talk to people just generally. And, conferences and that sort of thing causes me a lot of stress beforehand. I'm always happy as I'm doing it and when I finish doing it. But yeah, all the anxiety and the stress beforehand really does get to me, but I hide it well.
I'm honestly the same way. I get a lot of anticipatory anxiety, and that's something that I'm trying to work through. It's interesting for me because I discovered you through your book, The Path of the Hedge Witch.
Mhm.
And you talk a lot about solitary witchcraft and doing a lot of these practices on your own. So for me, it doesn't come as a huge surprise that you are introverted.
Yeah, but a lot of people see, that different social face of me. But I'm happiest when I'm on the other side of the screen just writing. I prefer my written words to express what's inside me rather than verbal words,
Yeah.
which sounds a bit antithetical as I'm doing a podcast with you. But
No,
there you go.
I honestly can understand that, even though I have a podcast and I do love speaking, writing can a lot of the time come more naturally to me as well. So I do
For
understand
sure.
that.
I like to take the time when you're writing because then you have the time to think
Mm-hmm.
before you speak and you can correct things and then you can get it just right. I'm a perfectionist. What can I say?
I call myself a recovering perfectionist, but yes, no, I'm a big reflector and processor. That's another reason why I like writing as well, because sometimes I don't know how I feel about something in the moment. I need time to
Yes,
let it
and it
settle.
helps you work through those emotions and whatever it is. That's the beauty of writing. So
Mm-hmm.
many of my blog posts and that are just me trying to work out a situation or a feeling or an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
If someone were to ask you, who are you or what do you do? I don't love that question, but how would you explain your work to people?
Well, if someone, just came up to me and said, "What do you do?" I would say I'm an author.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they ask what I write about, I would tell them I write both fiction and nonfiction. And then if they are still interested, then I'll go into it. And it's funny because I kind of have to adapt what I'm saying to the person I'm saying it to. So if somebody who's down at my parents' legion asking me what it is that I do, I have to phrase it in a language that they will understand, which will be very different from, say, somebody who is in the pagan sphere who knows about witchcraft and that. So yeah, I'd have to phrase it differently depending on who's asking me. For myself, I'm an author first and foremost. as to what I do for a living, but that's also who I am as a person as well. I think in words, I think in stories all the time. That is just the way that my brain seems to be programmed. Ever since I can remember, I've always been making up stories and either acting them out or writing them out. And I'm a witch. I feel like that is definitely a deep part of my soul that has perhaps carried through different lifetimes. I'm not entirely sure, but it feels like an integral part of myself. And I also say that I'm a druid as well because I studied for 10 or 15 years in the path of Druidry. So I'm all of those things. But those are the main thing. When people ask me who I am, those are the main things that I say.
And how do you define being a witch?
Oh, that's hard because it's different for every single person.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, being a witch is about seeing and feeling the enchantment around you and wanting to work with it, wanting to dance with it, wanting to touch it and embrace it and bring it into your life. So there's so many different ways that you can do that, and that's why there are so many different traditions of witchcraft. But it's noticing the things in the world around you. It's really taking a close observation of the natural world and finding the beauty and enchantment in that, and then seeing and bringing that into your own life so that you can reflect the world around you and taking inspiration from the natural world around you and then using that in your life to create a better life for yourself. That's probably the definition of magic rather than witchcraft, but they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I really love that because I can find that those who don't know what witchcraft is or know what being a witch is can have these certain perceptions or preconceived notions about what it is. And often a lot of people think it's very woo-woo or airy and ungrounded. And really, for me, it's so grounded. It's so connected to nature. It's so much about presence and intentionality and really creating the life that you want to live.
Very much so.
So, what are some rituals or practices that you personally weave into your life on a more regular basis?
Well, I think just it's very simple things. So I try and watch the sunset every day if I can. I'm way too tired in the mornings to watch the sunrise,
Mm.
but sunset for me is always my favorite time of day. It's the time of day when I can just put aside everything that has happened in the day and to just be in the moment and share in the wonder of the natural world around me and get out of my own head for a bit. And that, to me, that is the most beneficial thing I do every single day, if I can, if I'm not traveling or whatever, is just watching the sunset. It's as simple as that. But I also try and meditate as much as possible. Watching the sunset is a form of meditation for me, but I also try and do more traditional forms of meditation because I find that helps keep my busy brain on the right track and also stops me from getting too involved in everything that is whirling around in my brain because I have so many plates up in the air all the time. Walks in my landscape. I'm always wondering what has changed in the landscape since the last time I went out. So several times a week, I'm either out there walking on the heath or in the forest or by the sea and just seeing what has changed in the natural world. How is everything around me feeling? How am I a part of that particular ecosystem? Just appreciating everything that I have around me. I mean, I live in a beautiful part of the world. I live on the Suffolk coast of England. So I have a wonderful forest on my doorstep. I have the North Sea, and I also have miles of heathland as well. So I know I'm very lucky in that regard that I can just go for a walk whenever I want. But even when I was living in the city, I sought out different places to reconnect to the natural world. daily. So when I was living in the city of Montreal in Quebec, I would go to parks, or I lived near the river. So I would sit next to the river and connect with the energy of the river. I was working in downtown Montreal among all the high rises, but I used to go to a tiny little church that was kind of nestled in amongst all these skyscraper buildings, and it had a little green space around it, and I would just sit in that little green space with my hands on the earth and just connecting to that earth energy. So it's finding ways to connect, and that's the main thing about any earth-based tradition, whether it's witchcraft or whether it's druidry. It's all about connection, daily connection if possible. So those are the things that I do daily. And then on top of that, of course, I celebrate the seasonal festivals, the rituals, the Sabbats, the phases of the moon, either by myself, or I have a group of friends as well that I'll celebrate with. That's pretty much it, really.
I love that. And for me, it always comes back to connection too. And especially with nature, it's having this conversation with nature, really letting yourself have this reciprocal relationship and finding the places where you can hear it, whether it's a patch of grass or a huge forest, just finding that place where you can tune into the energy and begin that conversation, begin that connection.
Yeah. My first teacher, she hammered it into us that it's all about relationship, and she's not wrong.
Wow. Is that your first teacher when it comes to witchcraft or druidry, or what was she referring?
This was in Druidry. I haven't had any physical teachers in witchcraft. I'm pretty much self-taught. But my first teacher in Druidry was Emma Rustle Orr. Um, this was back when she was offering retreats and classes and that sort of thing in the Cotswolds. And I also connected with her because I used to be a trustee for the Druid Network when she was head of the Druid Network. So I used to see her at the different conferences and things like that. So she was essentially my first in-person teacher
Mm.
many, many moons ago now.
And what is your definition of druidry if people don't know?
It's pretty much the same thing as witchcraft, but using a different language to express it. So, Druidry usually uses a Celtic framework to express its tradition. There's all sorts of Druidry. You can worship all sorts of gods in Druidry, but the mainstay of most Druidry is a deep relationship with Celtic tradition, Celtic gods, Celtic culture. And so I think that's the main thing that separates it from witchcraft. Although you can have Celtic witchcraft, that is very much a thing too. So I would say that they're kind of almost like sister traditions to each other. And when we look back historically and we see the birth of modern witchcraft and the birth of modern druidry happened at exactly the same time with two people who knew each other very well, Ross Nichols and Gerald Gardner. They were friends. They hung out, they talked, they developed their traditions alongside each other. So it's no wonder that they are so similar.
Interesting. Yeah. And what was your initial beginning to witchcraft and druidry? How did you find it, discover it, and how did you decide this is a path I want to walk?
So I came across Wicca first in 1991 or 1992, fresh into college. So living in a big city for the first time and having access to a whole wide range of people that I never had before in my tiny little hometown. And I remember one day my boyfriend at the time took me to a store called Mélange Magique. In English, that's the magical blend in Montreal. And I walked in and I knew I was home. I had the smell of the incense, books everywhere, cats roaming the shelves. Cats were just everywhere, beautiful tools and crystals. And Lorena McKennitt was playing on the sound system, who is like my absolute most favorite artist in the world. And I just, right then and there, I was like, this is home. And I went to one of the bookshelves and I just pulled off the first book that I saw, which, as most people who are my age. The first book they pulled off was Scott Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide for the Magical Practitioner. And I read that book and I said, yes, this makes sense. This is what I've always felt in my soul, but I didn't have the language to express that. And so I studied Wicca for quite a long time, for many, many years, until probably around 2000, 2002, somewhere in that time. I'm not entirely sure, where I then came across Druidry. I'd lived in the UK for a couple of years by then. I moved to the UK in 1998. And so I started talking to more people, British people, about pagan traditions and going to conferences and pub moots and that sort of thing and discovering different traditions. And so obviously I learned about Druidry. And so that's when I began my deep dive into Druidry, and from there studied for a long time. I've written quite a few books on Druidry, and that has never left me. That's like the core of who I am because it fits deeply with my values. I always say that I was born a witch, but I trained as a druid.
Mm.
That's how it makes sense to me to combine the two traditions within me. And then once I moved here and settled in my house here, this is where I finally decided to not be so focused on labels and to just be who I am. And whatever that may be, it's a culmination of so many different things, and just express myself in that regard. So I still maintain I was born a witch and trained as a druid, and that's pretty much how I got to this place.
There are so many things that you touched on that I want to speak to. One, how you finished saying that the labels aren't important. You know, they can be helpful to conceptualize for ourselves and others what we practice or who we are in certain ways. But overall, like you were saying, witchcraft is something different to everyone. So if I even say I'm a witch, that still might not encapsulate who I truly am or help you understand who I am. And so it's really being able to step outside of the labels and find our own path to magic, our own path to ourselves in whatever way looks good for us, and just being comfortable and confident enough to own that and not needing it to fit neatly into one specific box.
Exactly, because I mean, no one will ever fit into a specific box perfectly because we all have so many different life experiences behind us that inform us and shape who we are. So there's no way that there's going to be a one size fits all when it comes to any spiritual tradition, whether it's pagan or not.
Exactly. Another thing you were talking about is that sense of home that you felt when you walked into that store. And I've had those moments many times in my life. And it's especially that first time when it connects you to something that then becomes such an integral part of who you are. It's so special.
Yeah.
And for me, I recognize that as a connection to my intuition, a connection to magic. And I'm curious what your relationship is like with your intuition.
Well, I think that we really need to pay more attention to our intuition. And we're told to push that aside to work with logic and that sort of mind state more than following our intuition, our heart, our feelings, our emotions. But there's a very good reason why we have these feelings and emotions and the way our brains think the way they do. And I think intuition, even though it's something that cannot be measured by science, is something that we desperately need to take more notice of in our lives because we have it and we have it for a reason. And I've noticed in my own life, when I have gone against my intuition, I always regret it. Always, always, always.
Always.
So there's a deep knowing in your heart and in your soul and in your physical body as well when something is right and when something is wrong. And as witches, I think perhaps we learn to use that and to trust that quicker, perhaps, than other people because we're not afraid to work with these kind of unseen, unstudied forces. Our souls are more open to magic and enchantment anyway, so why not intuition? It's all part of the same thing. On another level, I think that intuition is it's just a part of our animal brain that sees and understands things that are rational human brain doesn't quite understand. So intuition and instinct are often the same thing for me physically, if that makes any sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And honestly, what you were just saying made me feel like intuition is logical. We have just discounted that because it's not tangible. We can't explain it, or we can't ha have proof and evidence that it's certain and controllable. And so that makes us fear it and push it away.
Yeah,
But following our intuition is so logical. It is innate in us. I agree with everything you just said. And I think everyone is intuitive. So many of us push that away and turn it off. And then on another level, so many of us are afraid of following through on it. And so I think it's important to develop the relationships that you can hear it again and reconnect to it. And then also develop the confidence within yourself to then act on that and listen to what your intuition's telling you.
very much so. Because I think intuition speaks on a spirit level much more than on a rational level. And there's so many different facets of ourselves and of our souls. We are not just the rational thinking person. We are also, especially if you're working in witchcraft or other pagan traditions, we're also magical people. So that's where we have to work and listen to our intuition.
What are some ways that you work with and strengthen that connection with your intuition?
I think it's a case of trusting my instinct and listening to my heart rather than my head a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because my head will say one thing, but my heart and sometimes my body, because sometimes I have a physical reaction to things, will tell me otherwise. So it's learning to trust that and to trust in that process. Don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense. And
Okay.
I'm on the same page. I honestly, a lot of times people ask me why I did something or why I made a decision, and I'm like, I just felt it. I just had to do it. Like it is a felt sensation. It is a heart-led guidance, and it's hard to put that into words.
Yeah, yeah. Some things you just feel.
Talking about the importance of relationships, how has practicing witchcraft and druidry impacted the relationships in your life, if it has?
Oh, yeah, it definitely has. Yeah. I think because when you start to study the natural world around you, you start to step outside of yourself so that you can hear the stories of the natural world around you. So when I'm outside spending time with the trees or with the deer or whatever it is that I'm encountering at that moment, I am not thinking about myself. I am thinking about them and trying to communicate with them, or not even communicate, just listening to them, to listen to their stories for a change rather than listening to the story that I tell myself about myself all the time in my head. And when we start listening to others, that's when we really see the shift in our relationships, especially with other human beings. I think it's a shame in our modern world that so many children these days are suffering from nature deficit disorder. They are not getting outside into the natural world and they're not hearing the stories of the natural world around them. And at least this is my opinion. This is causing difficulties in them understanding each other, because when we understand the world around us, we also understand other people and the way that their minds work, because we have listened to their story. When we don't listen to other people's stories and we're just too involved in our own story, we'll never create a deep relationship, a knowing and understanding relationship. And the other problem there is that we often are too afraid to look at the shadow aspects of ourselves. And it's only when we see the good and the bad in ourselves, when we truly spend time understanding ourselves, that's when we begin to understand other people. But there's so many distractions in modern life. Mobile phones, they are the world's biggest drug, the world's biggest distraction, the world's biggest opiate for the masses at the moment. And they're preventing people from just being with themselves And if you don't understand yourself and how your brain works and how you work, how are you ever supposed to understand how other people work? And how are you ever supposed to make a connection to other people? I think that we need to take a step back from technology every now and then. You know, technology is wonderful. It's allowing you and I to speak. It allows me to talk to my mom back in Canada once a week, but it's also such a big diversion to stop us from understanding ourselves, from spending time with ourselves, from learning how to be bored, from learning how to be lonely, from learning all these different things, from going out in nature. And it's cutting us off on so many different levels that we're having a hard time understanding other people around us.
You're preaching to the choir. This is something I'm so passionate about. And I think that we all need more time in stillness and in silence and connecting to ourselves and not distracting and just being. And
Mm.
I am someone who can get so caught up in productivity and perfectionism and producing. And that's what the world pushes on us. And deciding to see simply being as one of the most productive things I can do for myself has changed my life. And it has allowed me to be more creative, to be more thoughtful. You start to realize how much more space you have in your brain to understand who you are and what you want in life when you're not filling it with the noise and the distraction and all the other people telling you what to do. How do you maintain that for yourself?
Like I said previously, it's getting out in nature, watching the sunset, walking, and just putting that phone down. Spending time with my cat, going out and doing some gardening. That's a huge way to just connect with my immediate landscape as well.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the times the distraction is a form of numbing and avoiding. We're so afraid of ourselves in a lot of ways and of being different and of really connecting to our full power. I think that that's a huge part of it. And I find that so many people are just afraid to own who they truly are and what they truly want.
Why do you think that is, though? I love hearing other people's take on that. Like what would make somebody afraid to connect to their own power?
You know, I think in some ways it can be different for each person. For a lot of people, it's because we want to fit in
Yes.
and people want to be accepted and part of the community. And so you just want to go with the status quo and do what everyone else is doing. And if you start to connect to your full power, you realize that you might be different or you have to embrace a different path or do things that are challenging. So I've seen that that's what comes up for a lot of people in different flavors for each person. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, very much the same. The funny thing is that it's only when you come into your own power that you realize that nobody is quote unquote normal. You know, you can't fit in because there's nothing to fit into.
Mhm, mhm,
Everyone is strange and magical and completely different.
mhm,
But when, like you said, once you come into your power, there are a lot of life-changing decisions that you make, and a lot of them are difficult and challenging. Like if you start really going deep into an earth-based tradition, you have to learn all about consumerism, what you are consuming, how you can change your lifestyle to be more in tune with your spiritual beliefs. And that requires a lot of education and that requires a lot of behavioral change, which people don't like change in the first place, but behavioral change is one of the hardest things that we will ever have to do in our lives. But it's so worth it when you do start to do that. Like Maya Angelou said, do the best you can, and then when you know better, do better. I
mhm.
think that that's those are words to live by.
I agree. And that's something I say often, actually, when you know better, you do better. And I really do think so much of it is about not, and this comes back to what you were saying before around not being able to be bored, people are so uncomfortable with discomfort, and we haven't learned how to be uncomfortable. And so we just immediately turn to the phone, we immediately turn to the distractions. And if we could just sit in that discomfort for like 5 minutes longer than we think we can, we realize there's not as much to be afraid of as we thought there would be, or we realize what we have to do to move through the discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we could do that is better than spending time on your phone. And yes, I spend time on my phone. I'm on pretty much almost all of the social media platforms because that's how I spread the word of my own personal business. And I also enjoy, a good scroll session through Instagram Reels because I have the most hilarious videos on there. I also know that the real world is waiting for me out there too. So if I realize I'm spending too much time on my phone and it's not work related, yes, entertainment is great. It's essential for us to be happy, but we have to find entertainment in other things as well, in things that aren't provided for us. We have to go and seek out our own entertainment. And again, this is a problem I think that we have with a lot of children today is that they, you know, my whole family are teachers. My mother was a teacher, my sister's a teacher, my brother's a teacher. So I hear these discussions regularly. The fact that kids don't know how to play anymore. They don't make up games anymore, or they don't play pretend anymore because they haven't learned how to do that because they have are devices that provide content for them. So they're just consumers of entertainment. They are not providers, players in their own play, in their own life. And I just find that really sad. And I think that's something that we really have to address quickly before, we evolve out of that wonderful brain set that allows us to pretend and to enjoy and to tell stories and things like that from when we're a young child until our deathbed. We should always be in that sort of wonderful creative mind space.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing make believe and making up stories and playing with the fairies in the forest, and it makes me sad. A lot of kids are not doing that anymore. And no one quote me on this because I'm not going to get it perfectly right, but I read something recently about how some researchers did a study and they tested kids at a young age for creative genius, and 100% of them were these like creative artistic geniuses, and they kept testing the same kids as they got older and older, and that number slowly started to dwindle and get smaller. But the fact that 100% of them were creative geniuses at that young age just blows my mind, and it's really stayed with me, and I've been thinking about it because we should foster that, we should encourage that. And that doesn't, I mean, I'm sure there are different variables for why that number dwindles as we get older, but I'm sure a lot of it is because someone tells us we're not creative, or someone gives us a phone, or the society judges us and we just shut it down, And really, we should be honoring that creativity and leaning into it. Of course, there's no black and white. Obviously, I'm also on social media and it's all about intentionality and presence with it. But I do think that we need to be the ones who are empowered to choose how we want to use it versus just getting sucked into it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the basis of relationship is a give and take. And if you're always consuming things and not giving back, that's an abusive relationship.
Mm.
It has to be on both sides. So we consume all of this media. What are we giving back? Where are the books? Where are the plays? Where's the artwork? It's so sad when we see how many art classes are being cut from schools all the time. How are we supposed to foster and develop an appreciation of art, let alone to continue the legacy of art that we have as human beings, if we're not nurturing that in some form?
Mhm.
Everyone's just taking in things but not giving back. And we know that in that sort of relationship, it's not sustainable in the slightest. It's just going to run dry very, very soon.
Speaking of, I want to talk about you being a writer because I also love writing and I'm so curious about your writing process and also the fact that you've fairly recently, you've also started producing fiction books. And so I'd love to hear about how you first started writing, why you decided to switch to start writing fiction and just what your writing process is like. Anything in that realm that you want to share.
I began writing fiction when I was like 12 or 13 years old. I started writing my first book back then. And I finished writing that book when I was like in my late 20s or something like that. And I sent it to all the publishers and I got rejected by everyone. I remember sending it to Wizards of the Coast, which they do the Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms books and stuff
Mm.
like that. And I got the best rejection letter from them. They said that the material was a little too far advanced or something for our core readership who are 16-year-old boys. It's just like, really? But I read and I consume all of your content, and I'm a 20-something woman, and I know lots of women who love the fantasy genre. And so I just find it funny that I've come full circle and now I'm writing fantasy again. Because especially now we have the Romantasy genre, which is
Mhm.
making a huge difference in who consumes books, why we consume books, and allowing people to just say, this is what I want to consume. Women have always been a big part of the fantasy world, but never got the credit for it. You know, we have the Tolkiens and we have the C.S. Lewis's, but everyone tends to forget the Dragon Riders of Pern and Anne McCaffrey books and things like that, who started all of this. You wouldn't have Rebecca Yarros and her Empyrean series and Fourth Wing and stuff if it wasn't for Anne McCaffrey and the Dragon Riders of Pern.
Mhm.
But that audience for so long was catering towards a male perspective, and now it's flipped on its head and there are so many women fantasy authors now, especially in that new genre of romantasy, which is just I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. I feel vindicated from that letter that I got from Wizards of the Coast all those decades ago. And I want to frame it and next to
Mhm.
covers of my books and say, it's not what you think it is. But, anyways, to get back on track, I started writing my nonfiction books after I had been practicing my different pagan traditions for a decade or two. I didn't feel qualified to write until I had really absorbed the traditions into my soul. So I think when was the first book I wrote was in 2012. And so I had been studying pagan traditions since like about 1991. So it's a good couple of decades, isn't it? I can't do the maths right now. I'm horrible at maths. And I do a lot of research with my nonfiction. When I'm about to start a nonfiction book, I have at least a year's worth of research
Mm.
before I start writing that book because I think that's really, really important. I mean, I'm always reading and I'm always learning things, but that is a year of culminating all of the things I have learned and read and taking down notes from books and making sure that when I do start writing, I'll have all of my footnotes and I can credit where I got this information, where I got that information. And that takes at least a year to get together, if not more. And then the actual writing process itself is quite quick. I find that's the easiest bit.
Interesting.
It's the research and it's the gathering of all of the resources and stuff. And then on the flip side of that, once the writing is finished, the editing process, that's a long time too. Whereas the writing, that's easy. I can do that.
Mm.
So if I'm writing a nonfiction book, it takes me at least 2 to 3 years to get something out.
Wow.
Whereas with writing fiction, because I have read so much of this genre and I can combine it with everything that I have learned in my witchcraft and in my druidry that I have been practicing for decades, that just flows out of me and I don't have to worry about resources and
Mm.
accreditation and making sure that everything is set in these boxes. It just flows. And so I can release 1 or 2 books a year now. I've just finished writing the manuscript for the third book in my Witches of the New Forest series. And I just started writing that series. When was it? In June 2024 was when I first started
Wow.
writing. So
That's amazing.
yeah, there's a big difference in the writing and how it comes about with fiction and nonfiction.
Mm.
And I think it's important with nonfiction to take your time and to make sure that all your ducks are in a row. Because for decades, we have suffered from books that have a lot of bad information or misinformation or information that isn't properly credited to the source that it should have,
Hmm.
especially within the pagan sphere. And so it's really important that the books that we release today are doing what they should have done 10, 20 years ago, like other nonfiction books have. I know that a lot of the pagan presses, they're not academic presses. I get that. But if somebody says something, an editor should, if there's any doubt, an editor should say, well, where did you source this information from? Did you just make it up or is it actually from somewhere? Not making it up is probably the wrong word, but if it's like a personal gnosis, fine, just make sure that you state that that is your own personal experience or feeling rather than stating that as a fact for everyone. So there's a huge difference between writing fiction and nonfiction. But right now I am so loving my fiction. I'm loving the characters in the world that I've created. My series, it's called Witches of the New Forest, and it all takes place in the little witchy town of Burley. For anyone that doesn't know, Burley is a real village that exists in the New Forest in England. And it's a really strange, magical little place. It's got a tiny high street. There's a handful of houses around, but it has like 3 different witchcraft stores, and
Wow.
it's because it's all boomed off of the witchy tourism when Sybil Leek used to live there before she got kicked out because the village was getting tired of the media circus that always followed her everywhere that she went.
Wow.
So Burley is a real place where you can visit. There's some fantastic witchcraft shops. And all around the New Forest itself, there's so many myths and legends and tales about witchcraft dating back almost like millennia. You've got tales from the Ettenwood before the New Forest was called the New Forest, and you've got tales dating back to Rufus the Red King, and then you've got tales dating to the 1950s. You've just got this huge progression and this vast repertoire of witchiness that I can draw on for these books.
Mm.
So I'm loving it. I have so much to draw from, not only of my love of this place, but the local folklore and mythology of the New Forest, which really, really resonates with me. And so I can bring this all together and create this wonderful world where I desperately want to live with characters I desperately want to interact with.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh my God, so magical. I'm one of those people who, through the romantasy genre, have found fantasy and found my love for these types of books. And I'm so grateful because I never liked fantasy before this or never gave it a chance. And I am now in love with it, and I'm very excited to get your books and to read them. I love your story about the rejection letter because I think it's proof that rejection is not a sign that we're doing what we shouldn't be doing or that we should give up or stop or anything.
Mm.
It's rejection is redirection, it's protection, it's a lesson, it's an experience. And I'm really honing in on that for myself on how if there is a wall in front of you or a stop sign, it doesn't mean that you stop and turn around. It means that you go around it or you pause for a second and then continue forward. And I just love that you shared that story. And I also agree that it's really important to be in integrity when you're sharing facts and when you're sharing things such as nonfiction, because a lot of people don't question things and just take what's written as fact. And when sometimes it's not. And I think that we see that with social media, how things are out there and people are stating it as if they're an authority and it's not true. So I love how you really know that that's a responsibility and take that. And I think that it's really important.
Yeah, it's funny because like so many of the the witchcraft and pagan books that came out in the 90s and even in the early 2000s were so full of things that were just made up.
Mm,
And now we're seeing the same thing happening again, but it's not in books because people aren't really reading nonfiction books as much as they used to.
mm,
It's happening in social media. And exactly the same as it happened in books back in the 90s, where people are just rephrasing and regurgitating all of this incorrect stuff. We see it happening just in a new form on social media now, and I find that really interesting. I'm in my 50s now, and because I've been here long enough, I'm seeing the patterns starting to repeat,
mhm.
and I find it fascinating.
It is fascinating to track patterns through history and to see,
Mhm.
oh, this is happening again, just in a different form. I mean, the goal is to learn from past experiences and to use it as information versus just letting ourselves repeat the past. But, we're at where we're at. So
For sure, for sure.
I would love to know what is desire in your heart right now? If you could make one wish for yourself or for your life, what would it be?
I would like to make a decent living off of writing. If you're writing nonfiction, you definitely need another job.
Mm.
There's no way, especially in the pagan sphere, there's no way you're going to make money off of witchcraft books anymore. Decades ago, people used to make kind of decent royalties on witchcraft books. Now the most of the contracts that you get 10% of whatever's left over after everyone has taken their cut. You then get 10% of that, which is peanuts, really.
Hmm.
Combine that with the fact that less people are buying and reading books these days and instead consuming information on social media. So nonfiction is taking a real huge nosedive. So that's a big thing that I wish would change, but the trend isn't going that way at the moment. The trend is going in the opposite direction and it's really starting to go down. However, with the fiction, I'm loving writing my fiction. I'm adoring it. And that's also kind of starting to pay the bills, which is a huge relief. I'm entirely self-published, so I have to do everything, cover design, editing. I have some friends helping me with editing, which is brilliant. But everything, it's down to me to do all the marketing, all design, all of that stuff. But then I also get the profits from that. So I'm starting to be able to make a living from it. But that's only because my husband has a decent paying job. If he didn't, I would still have to go and have a second job to be able to do what I'm doing. So I would just love to be able to have an income that I could actually live on. I'm not asking to be a New York Times bestseller, although that would be amazing.
I want that for you.
Yeah, I'd love that. But I just to be able to be self-sustained in something that I love, which is writing, I would love for that. That's the only thing that I would love because everything else is right now it's pretty much as good as it gets.
Mm. Oh, well, I am holding that desire for you and that intention for you. And I, for one, I'm a lover of books. I always will be. I always have been. And I love your books. And I've yet to read your fiction books. I'm very excited to get them. And I just really believe that we're meant to love our lives and we're meant to love our work. And you clearly do. And so I hope that through following that path and crafting the magic through your words, your desires will come to fruition. So I'm holding that for you.
Thank you so much. That's really sweet.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, okay. Living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
I think bucking the trend and just going for it and just saying, you know what? I'm an author. I've always been an author. I can't help it. I'm going to give it a go. And
Mm,
then just doing it. Returning to your child self is a huge part of living intuitively wild, because your younger self, your child self, it often knows better what's for you than your adult self. So finding that within you, because life is just so much simpler back then. You know what makes you happy and what doesn't make you happy. You know what instills joy and enchantment in your life. So a return to that before all the waters got muddied, I think that's a really good way of living intuitively wild.
I really, really love that. Coming back to the simplicity and following our joy, following our desires, like we were talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Joanna, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it and grateful for all the magic that you share in all the ways that you share it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.